So, I am probably barely qualified to stand up here and talk to you about children's books. Nevertheless, with my friend and co author Brandon Patterson and our illustrator Erica Lazar, we went through the process of creating a children's book centered on a fluid mechanics phenomena called cavitation. Now, the goal of this talk is really to convince you that writing a children's book about fluids is doable and it's a lot of fun. And we think that you can have a large impact on a segment of the population that we don't tend to reach in our outreach activities. So Brandon and I were both PhD students at the University of Michigan studying cavitation erosion. And on the side, we also did a lot of outreach events. So we were heavily involved in engineering clubs and science fairs to help students get acquainted with fluids and physics in general. And we wanted to tackle what we consider the ultimate challenge in outreach. That is to reach out to the children that are around 4 or 5 years old, which you can consider probably the toughest audience out there. And we ran into this opportunity through the University of Michigan for collaboration between arts and engineering. And we felt that a children's book about our research would fit this perfectly. So we found an illustrator and off we went. First thing we needed to do is figure out what really a children's book is. So we've all read children's books and we're all pretty familiar with them, but one of the things that we may not have noticed when we were kids and reading these books is that there's a common theme throughout these books. There's a common set of rules that go into creating a children's book. Those rules are twofold. So there's some that come from the publisher. There's a lot of different standards out there in the industry. A children's book is considered to be around 700 words, which is about the length of a conference abstract. And you spread this out over 24 or 32 pages. The industry likes factors of 8, multiples of 8. And one of the things that really surprised us when we dove into this world is that authors tend to write the story, ship it off to a publisher, and the publisher will, if they like the story, take it upon themselves to find an illustrator for the story. And in this kind of traditional model, the authors and the illustrators have very little to do with each other. And the author loses a lot of control over the final product or their vision. As an author, there are a set of rules and tropes that you must follow. The most important one is probably that everything has to happen in sets of 3. So this is a common theme throughout children's books, that actions or events happen in sets of 3. Another very important rule that tripped us up early on in our writing is that kids must be masters of their own destinies inside these stories. So adults never should be telling the children what to do in these stories. And one of our earlier iterations of the story, we actually had an adult scold the hero of our book and tell him to go away. And apparently, by talking to different authors that we knew, this is apparently something that we should not be doing. As a writer, you have to be careful about the language you use, obviously. And one of the things that really surprised us is that you cannot have fun with communication verbs. So in a dialogue, you can't have somebody saying something and then, saying screamed Brooke, for example, or harangued Brooke, or yelled Brooke. People just say things, and as a writer, you have to make sure that the words convey the way in which it is said so that the reader can understand what intonation to use for that part of the dialogue. So we're talking about, more specifically than children's book, we're envisioning a STEM picture book. And when we set out to do this, there's a couple things that we absolutely wanted to be part of the vision. The first thing is that there has to be one clear message. So as scientists, this was extremely difficult for us because when you say cavitation to me and Brandon, there's 1,000 different things that we want to talk about. And out of all those things that we wanted to talk about, we had to pick one specific scientific fact that we wanted to convey. The one that we ended up discussing at length in the book is basically the main message of the book is that bubbles break things. And it's so important to us that we made that part of the title of the book. So it's fun to have a scientific message, but it also must be relatable. The children, we felt, needed to be able to relate to the main character in the book. And the angle that we took on that was to look at quirks and weirdnesses in people that always make them feel awkward. They cause problems socially. You don't make friends because your awkwardness causes problems, or your awkwardness makes you break things, and you just feel in general out of sorts. And we felt like this is something that everybody can relate to. Of course, this is a children's book, so it has to be a lot of fun. And so the flip side of being weird is that your weirdness can also be really awesome and end up saving the day. And the way we wove these three different things into the story is as follows. So this is our hero, Brooke Bubble. She has the hiccups. The hiccups for us are a way to translate what cavitation is, right? So she has the hiccups in scientific terms, which is she's cavitating. And so she has the hiccups, and these cause all sorts of problems. She punches a hole in a barrel of oil, which ends up wrecking the coral reef that she wants to use as a playground with her friends. She decides to run away and hide so she can, not cause any more problems with her hiccups. She runs into a submarine, and of course, she breaks the submarine's propeller. Eventually, she runs into the arch villain of our story, which is the mantis shrimp. And the mantis shrimp tries to weaponize our hero, Brooke Bubble, to kill a poor fish. Luckily, Brooke Bubble realizes what's going to happen right before it happens, saves the fish, and the fish ends up helping her discover what she can do with her powers. And she ends up saving the day with those hiccups that she has now that she knows how to control them. So if that narrative felt very natural to you, it's because we're using a narrative structure that is commonly used by storytellers throughout the world. And the way you can visualize this is to look at a graph of tension as a function of time in your story. So obviously everything starts out normal, everything's good. Arise, which drive the tension in your story. Eventually that culminates in a crisis, and that gives the opportunity for our hero to emerge, save the day, drive all that tension out of the story, and everything is well again. Now, this is a structure that forms kind of the backbone of a lot of stories, and probably your favorite journal articles follow something very similar to this. So now that we've talked a little about the overarching context in which you write a children's book, I want to talk a little bit about the process of going from a blank page to a finished product. So the first thing you have to do, and the most important thing you have to do when you're writing a children's book, is to get to know your characters, develop your characters. You need to know your characters so well, so intimately as that friend you've been Facebook stalking for the last 10 years. And this is important because laying out the characters and their personality drives the story. As you start writing and you start having events or problems arising in the story, your characters will tell you how they will act in different scenarios. They will be the ones driving the story forward. The way you do this, practically speaking, is you start with the basics. What's the name of your character? How old are they? Their personality? Are they shy? Are they excited? Are they talkative? And then you have to go out and flesh out all these details. What are their favorite foods? What do they like to do? Who do they like to hang out with? What do they do in their free time? And the way we kind of went through this list of questions that we wanted to answer for our characters is by talking to kindergartners and listening to what questions they had for us when they first met us. And those are probably the questions that they would have for our characters. And so a lot of these character traits won't actually appear in the book, but they're really going to be driving your character's behavior throughout your story. So once you've got characters, you can start writing the story. And writing the story is a lot like writing a journal article. You have to write and rewrite and write and rewrite. It's a very iterative process, and one of the most important things to do is that you have to get rid of the ideas that you like. In the artistic world, they call this killing the baby. Killing the baby means that you have to get rid of that one thing that you absolutely want in that book because you think that scene is so funny or so great. And the problem with this is that it actually creates kind of this distortion field around the whole story and messes with the flow of your story. And once you're able to get rid of that one thing that you absolutely wanted there, you're able to rewrite your story and look at your story more holistically without this distorting field or this distorting effect from that one thing that you absolutely wanted. One of the things that we found particularly useful is hiring a professional editor. These are relatively inexpensive because they charge you by the page and they're only about 32 pages, so it comes to less than $100. But it's important because you want to get some comments from people that don't know you and don't have any skin in the game, right? And so you get a lot of very good critical feedback from this type of editing process. As all this is going on, you have to also illustrate the story. And this is probably the part that takes the most time. The first thing that we did is we did what they call storyboarding, which is you lay out all the different pages of your book and you kind of sketch out what kind of pictures you'd want in it. And this gives you kind of an overall vision of the flow of the story and lets you figure out where are the bottlenecks and where are you spending too much time, where are you spending too little time. The illustrative process itself is relatively slow, as I've mentioned. Our illustrator goes through this process where she first uses watercolor to sketch out the scene. Then she takes that and actually uses pencils to draw in and add some color and to give a little bit more texture to the scene. And finally, she pulls that into Photoshop and enhances the color of certain things that she wants to enhance. So as all this is going on, we're also, since we're scientists and we really need an outlet to talk about all the cool things that we know that pertain to cavitation, we also created a website. And our goal for this website is really to be a reference for educators and parents when they're reading the story, and if they want a little bit more context on cavitation or a little bit more better understanding of what's going on, they can refer to our website where we talk about cavitation in images and in lay terms so that everybody can understand. And we also have some pretty cool videos that they can show the kids, like of a thresher shark, using cavitation bubbles to hunt. So the stage we're at right now is we're considering different publishing venues. There are a lot of different ones out there. As academics, we have access to the university publishing system. And so we had a couple meetings with them, and ultimately we don't think we'll be pursuing that avenue. There are also the traditional publishers out there, but as I've mentioned before, this can be a little difficult because you have to do the illustrations. You don't have control over the illustrations, and this makes it a little bit difficult when you're trying to illustrate something scientific and you want to make sure it's correct. And the final option really is the self-publishing option, and I think ultimately that's the route that we're going to take. So with that, I hope I've convinced you that this is relatively doable. There's just a few rules out there that you have to follow. It's a lot of fun, and we think that fluids is particularly amenable to the making of children's books. Thank you very much for your attention.